Hello everyone, myself Sukrishna. In this video, I am going to explain classic Excel activities like create pivot table activity, refresh pivot table activities in UiPath Studio. So let's get started. Create pivot table activity. If you want to create a pivot table in the input Excel file, we can use the create pivot table activity. Basically, these pivot tables are helpful for quickly filter, analyze and summarize the table data in the input Excel file. So let me open the input Excel file. In the input Excel file, in the sheet 1, I have created a table and the table name is table 1. So let's see how we can create the pivot table by using this table 1. So let's go back to the UiPath Studio. For the create pivot table activity, we need to mention the sheet name where you wanted to create the pivot table. It could be the same name where you created the table, or else we can mention the different sheet name. In case if the sheet name is not available in the input Excel file, the new sheet will be created with that name. Then we need to mention the table name. So here in this case, the table name would be table 1, and then we need to mention the pivot table name. I am mentioning the pivot table name as invoice pivot table. Then we need to mention the range. So this range means in the mentioned sheet name at what position you wanted to create a pivot table. So I am mentioning the starting cell as E2, right? So if I run the process in the sheet 1 at E2 position, the pivot table will be created. So let's run the process and verify the output. Now the process execution has been completed. So let's open the input Excel file. In the sheet 1 at E2 position, the standard pivot table has been generated, and here in the pivot table name we can find the pivot table name that we mentioned in the activity. So as per our requirement, we can move these columns to the different areas like filters, columns, values manually. So I wanted to move the status column to the value section. So my pivot table is look like this. Refresh pivot table activity. Basically, for creating the pivot table, we are referring the table name, right? In case if any changes in the that table, let's say if you are deleting the rows or if you added the new data, so the pivot table will not update it automatically. So to update the pivot table, we need to refresh the pivot table. So for the refresh pivot table activity, we need to mention the sheet name where the pivot tables are created, and then we need to mention the pivot table name. Let me add some data here in the table. So now I have added the new data. If you see, the pivot table is not updated. So let's save and go back to the UiPath Studio. So in the pivot table name section, I am mentioning the pivot table name invoice pivot table, right? Now let's save and run the process and verify the output. Now the process execution has been completed. So let's open the input Excel file. So the data has been updated. So here we have 20 rows are available, right? This way we can work with create pivot table activity and refresh pivot table activities in UiPath Studio. Hope this video is helpful. Thanks for watching this video. Have a nice day.